As review of last week, we went over the concept of scientism. And if you can see it on the board here, can everybody see that? It's just a basic review of what we went over last week. You guys remember Hume's fork? Hume's fork is the empirical way of coming to knowledge. That knowledge can only be attained through two ways. Do you remember those two ways? So the one on the left says basic. Basic truths, axiomatic truths, self-evident truths. What would be an example of those? A basic truth is something that's self-evident. What would be an example of that? Okay, so sensory experience is over here. But what is a basic truth?
1 + 1 is 2.
What else would be a basic truth? All triangles have 3 sides. All bachelors are unmarried. That one. Right? So either it has to be basic or it has to go through sensory experience. What is a non-basic truth then?
Non-basic.
There is a church in Sparta. You have to drive there to see it to know it's there. It's information that you get by way of sensory experience, which would be the second tongue on the fork. So what the humanists are saying then, or the secularists are saying, or the empiricists are saying, is religion is superstitious and a myth. Religion is something that people just create in their minds. It can't be tested. It can't be verified. It can't be concluded through the senses. Science is fact. Science deals with hard empirical data. This marker is in my hand. The law of gravity, all of those things. Hard facts. Therefore, science is the only way to know something for sure. Remember that from last week? So what we want to do is take a look at, is there a way to refute this? How does the Christian deal with this? Because this is what you're going to get in most of your universities today. Those who are science-minded, those who say that science deals with reality and religion deals with myth. So there is really no need to bring religion into factual studies. There's no need to bring religion into history. There's no need to bring religion into anything, because that's nothing but mere superstition. We want hard fact.
I know this is orthodox.
No, they can't live this consistently. But in their mind, this is what they think is true. They have never connected the two dots together to realize, hey, there's an inconsistency here. How do we highlight this inconsistency? We highlight it real easy. So I could ask this question. How do I know my mom, my dad, or my spouse love me? Is it a basic truth? No. Can I come to an absolute conclusion through my senses? Can I put it in a test tube? Can I put it under a microscope? Can I prove it? So then how do I know my mom, my dad, or my spouse love me? And you could say, well, they care for you. It doesn't mean they love me. They could be faking. Like we heard this morning, you could be hypocritical. How do you know if somebody's telling the truth? So when it comes to love, how do I know, or anybody else know, that they love somebody else? Is that a basic truth? No, it would fall under non-basic. There's this church in Sparta, that kind of thing. You'd have to demonstrate it. So it's not a basic truth, and it really can't be seen by the senses. So then how do we know for sure? Now, if we take a look here on the top of page 1, as complex as scientism may appear, refuting it is really easy. I didn't give you the answer last week because I wanted you to wrestle with it, but if you didn't remember it, you couldn't wrestle with it either. We'll review it today. The Achilles heel for scientism is that it is a philosophy that cannot be verified empirically. So it is a belief system that can't be put under a microscope. Neither is it self-evident or axiomatic, so it's not basic. It is not a basic truth that cannot be verified in a laboratory, so guess what? It doesn't fit under Hume's fork. It falls outside the realm of Hume's fork, therefore it fails to meet its own standard. So what it's doing, it's imposing a standard on you that it itself cannot meet. This is what you have to do when you listen to arguments. You have to listen. Can their standard that they're imposing on you be verified by their own standard? So when an atheist says there's no empirical evidence for God, okay, is there evidence that disproves God? Well, no, so you're taking it on faith and so am I. We're both arguing from faith. So what we want to do is start to think, is what they're saying, can they substantiate it by their own belief system? And the belief that scientism is the only way for true knowledge cannot be verified by its own standard. So nobody illustrates this point clearer than Norman Geisler in the middle of page 1. On the first day of philosophy class in college, Geisler volunteered to give a presentation on the principle of empirical verifiability. That's scientism. So just another way of saying scientism, which is simply another name for scientism. I even put it there. Geisler was 20 minutes to speak. They gave him 20 minutes on speak on scientism. I'll give you 20 minutes. But he only needed less than a minute to refute it. How did he do it? He stood up to give his presentation, and this is his exact quote. The principle of empirical verifiability, known as scientism, states that there are only two kinds of meaningful propositions, or in other words, two ways to convey or come to truth. One, that those are by definition, which is a basic belief. Or two, are they empirically verifiable, meaning through the senses. Since the principle of verifiability itself is neither true by definition nor empirically verifiable, it cannot be meaningful. So if you're going to be consistent holding to scientism, your belief in scientism is a belief that cannot be empirically verified as well. So guess where that fits then? Right here. You have to put scientism right where they put religion. See, there's a big jump they make from there to there. When they only bring in a certain amount of knowledge that's necessary, they're stacking the deck in their favor. And they're using a standard to put down Christianity that refutes its own system, but we don't call that out. We just sit here and scratch our head and we play by their rules. We're allowing them to set the table. Now with Hume's fork, like any other fork, who determines what gets put on that fork? Who determines that basic and sensory experience is the only two criteria for knowledge? We do. And if we're going to play by their game, they get to set the table. Kind of like when I'm trying to lose weight because I like to eat, who determines what goes on my fork? Not my wife. She puts the food out there, but guess what I do? Boom, boom. I'm the one who decides what goes on the fork. So we have to move the question one step back. Who determines the criteria for epistemology, or how we know what we know? Who determines the rules? Like we saw last week in Genesis chapter 3, when Adam and Eve sinned, God had given them a specific command. God had already set the rules. Eve, when she saw the fruit, saw it was desirous, grabbed a hold of it, it could give her wisdom. Now she's creating her own set of rules for her own reality. And that's what we have been doing as humanity ever since, creating our own rules to determine who God is, what is right and wrong. We're creating our own nature of reality, which is metaphysics, our own way of knowing, which is epistemology. We're creating our own philosophy that is anti-God. We've been doing it since the fall. That's how the fall came to be. So on the bottom of the page, philosophy of scientism is self-defeating. It is not scientific, rather it is a statement of belief, a rational conclusion. So they're saying rationality and superstition run Christianity, but scientism also goes here, but they make a jump from scientism to scientists. So they try to bring science into their own camp, but it's a philosophy that is self-refuting. So these things are rather easy to take apart when you take a step back and look at it as a whole. Bottom of the top of page 2. If all knowledge is to be gained through the senses, as scientism claims, now you have to ask that person how they arrived to their conclusion. They didn't arrive to that conclusion through the senses, but through the mind. Notice they say everything is sensory experience. But now what the scientist does is they have to take that knowledge and make what's known as an interpretation. And the interpretation is something that the mind does. The interpretation is not what the sensory experience does. The sensory experience gives us the knowledge, but now that knowledge has to be taken and interpreted, which is where the mind comes in. So if we take a look at two people from the past, in the 1950s, Crick and Watson discovered the double helix within the DNA. And they concluded that this came about by natural processes of evolution. They're scientists. So since they're scientists, they deal with hard facts. Therefore, their conclusions must be true, right? So 1950s, not when you were born, Doc. The 1950s, not the 1850s. Yeah, right around that era, when you had your Sportster. So science and interpretation, what's the difference? This is what we have to hammer home, because when the scientists speak, we automatically think, oh, that's empirical fact. Science may be on discovering DNA, but now the interpretation of naturalism or evolution or philosophic naturalism, that it came about by its own natural process, it evolved on its own, is that science?
No.
So interpretations are based upon presuppositions. When we say God, they laugh at us. That's religion. But when they say evolution, they're saying that's science. Let's back this up even further. How much empirical evidence is there for evolution? Remember, we have to go all the way back. What were the 3 steps that we start with when we're going for origins? You remember? We covered it in the first week. Where do we start? So what does evolution start with? What are they? Philosophical naturalism, or also known as atheism. Where do they start? No, before that. They do. Big Bang, what was before the Big Bang? All the way back to the beginning. Nothing. Nothing. And then they go Big Bang. And then they say evolution. So, for this over here, naturalism is that over there, those 3 steps. Can you explain to me how DNA came by those 3 steps? Can we scientifically verify how the Big Bang came in by those 3 steps? Was anybody there to see it? Has this ever been tested in a laboratory? No. So then how can it be science? So it's not science, it's philosophy. And philosophy is based upon presuppositions. What are presuppositions again? Yeah, your ultimate commitments that you start with. That can't be tested by science. So what we have to differentiate is what is the science and what is the interpretation of the science, and what is that interpretation based upon. And when Crick and Watson determined that this came about by naturalism, because they're scientists, everybody automatically assumes then therefore their conclusion is based upon science, and it's not. It's based upon their own beliefs, just like we do. But they accuse us of doing this, but make it look like they're not doing it when they're doing it at the same time, and they deceive pretty much everybody.
I just put thought in here with the fact that like we can look back at Bible times a couple thousand years ago. We've not seen any evolution occur in that. Is that why they have to say it took millions and billions of years? Because we haven't witnessed it in the 2,000-3,000 years that we've observed.
Right. So what you have to do is,
it has to be a lot more than that.
if time, space, matter, and energy exploded at the Big Bang, we have to account for time, space, matter, and energy to begin with. And once we have it, can you tell me how that came from nothing? And then obviously you can't. Now they need billions of years for this to turn into this. That's why you need all that time. We witness, do you remember the different concepts of evolution? Cosmic, planetary, cellular, organic, macro, micro, and chemical. Okay? So evolution has to, they're always looking at the micro. So whenever a scientist talks about evolution, they look at micro variations within the same species. When Darwin was taking his notes, looking on the island of Galapagos at the different sizes of the beaks, that's microevolution. Yeah, you can see that, you can verify it in a laboratory. Even a Christian admits this. But can they do that with macro? From a fish to a reptile to an amphibian to a human? Can you scientifically prove that that has ever happened? No. Let's go back down here. Now that's belief. How about chemical? So when you take a look at the periodic table of elements on the wall in your chemistry class, can you verify to me in a laboratory that that evolved? Can each one evolve from each other? That one started and another one evolved? And see how much we have to start questioning them? Tell me how oxygen evolved from potassium, which evolved from, I don't know, I'm not a chemist, so I don't know. But explain to me scientifically how these elements evolved. Organic, life. How does something alive evolve from something that's not alive? How does human life evolve from matter? Can you demonstrate that to me in a laboratory? And they say spontaneous generation just came into existence, but that's been refuted. So how does life come from non-life? The planets, the stars, time, space, matter, energy, how does that evolve from nothing? So do you see how much ammunition we have to push back against their worldview? We've just never been trained how to think in reverse because we've all been brought up in today's secular society, which has taught us to think in a certain way. We don't even realize we've been taught to think this way. So when we hear a comment like, science says, then boom, we just automatically think, okay, it's got to be true because it's empirical and it's been tested. But what we have to separate is the science from the interpretation, from the belief. Scientists say religious statements all the time. Carl Sagan, the universe is all that there was, all that there is, and all that there ever will be. Is not a scientific statement. It's a statement of belief. There's no way that science can verify what he just said. But because he's a scientist, we have the scientist here, and we have what they say over here. We have 2 points. We automatically connect it and think it's true. Rather than what is the science, what is the interpretation? What are the presuppositions that underlie his scientific statement? And what they want to make it look like is everything they say is absolutely factual because it can be tested in a laboratory, and it can't. There is no way to say that the existence of DNA came about by itself. That is a belief system. There is no way to prove that in a laboratory. But because a scientist said it, therefore we think it's scientifically accurate. So on the middle of page 2, the philosophy of scientism, along with all interpretations that are derived from the scientific method, are based upon immaterial principles such as the laws of logic, the laws of mathematics, and the laws of physics. Now with Hume's fork, they'll include all that in there, but now you got to start asking them some questions. Why? How did you come to the conclusion of the laws of logic and the laws of science? Why are you including them there? How do they come into existence? They're immaterial. Philosophic naturalism teaches that everything is matter. If everything is matter, then how do you account for the immaterial laws of science that govern matter and energy? So there's another question we have to ask them. And if they go back to these three, and we go what? What do we say? What's our answer for all of this? It was in this month's Voice article that I wrote. Necessary being. We go back that there has to be a necessary being because non-being cannot produce being. Only a being can produce being. From nothing, nothing comes. From nothing, nothing will ever come. Everything that comes into existence needs what? A cause. Everything that comes into existence needs to be caused into existence. It just doesn't spontaneously come into existence. You don't sit in your living room and all of a sudden an elephant just runs through the room. It just came out of, it never happens. So they try to make us the irrational ones. They try to make us the foolish ones, the supernatural, myth-believing, medieval knuckle-draggers. But that's not true. So now what they're doing is they're projecting into your mind Christianity stupid, Christianity foolish, Christianity ignorant. But here's the problem. When a person walks up and asks a Christian about something, how many Christians can follow through with this now? If you talk to an atheist, ones who are serious about it, they'll give you the answer, and then guess what? They're going to put the Christian on their heels, and the Christian's going to be like, I don't know. This is where we need to step in, because we have a wide open field of questions we can be asking them that put them on their heels, which makes their system look foolish. You're telling me, and we can always go back to nothing, but you got to explain that. Yeah, nothing can come from nothing, I get that. But now be able to explain that. And this is what we're going to be looking at this fall as we get into first principles, as we get into uniformity of nature, as we get into philosophy of mind. That when you pick these apart and you take a look and you ask yourself the question, what is necessary in order for the world to be as it is? What is necessary in order for science in this universe to function as it does? And that's why we need a necessary being, because without the necessary being, there wouldn't be anything in existence. So we're going to be hammering these points in, week out. Hopefully this sinks in. But the middle of the page, science itself does not speak. We have to remember that. Scientists speak. They use their presuppositions and worldview to interpret what they see, just like Crick and Watson did with DNA. This is why metaphysics is simply nature, reality. What is real? What is the nature of what is real? Is the foundation of the scientific method. What scientism wants to do is get away with anything immaterial and bring in only anything that can be brought in through the senses. But science itself depends upon metaphysics. So it's undercutting its own foundation. Science cannot be separated from philosophy, as the Vienna Circle and others have attempted to do. They're cutting their fingernails too short. So as Christian scientist John Lennox states, the point is that scientific thought is or should be rational. But rational thought is by no means confined to the sciences. What he's saying there is the laws of logic that govern our thinking process are not in a test tube and they're not under a microscope. They exist somewhere completely different. The scientist uses logic in their interpretation of science. Now we got to ask ourselves a question. What is the nature of logic? The laws of logic. the law of identity, the law of excluded middle, and the law of non-contradiction. We use them all the time. You've probably never heard those terms before, but you think along those patterns every single day. And if anything violates that, it's automatically irrational. So let me give you an example. I'm in a courtroom and I'm trying to tell the judge that I was in Sparta and I was in Grand Rapids at the same time. Is the judge going to buy that? Because why? It's not logical. Why is it not logical? You can't be at two places at the same time. Law of non-contradiction. Nobody ever teaches us these laws. It's inherent within us. And we don't even think about it. We just overlook it. But if we take a step back, why does everybody think along these three principles? The law of excluded middle. Either something is true or false. If something's false, then it can't be true. If something's true, then it can't be false. The law of identity. I am who I am. I am not Mick. I'm not Doug. I am who I am. I am a human being. I am a man. That means I'm not a woman. So guess what? What's happening in today's culture is the laws of logic are being blurred, and our way of thinking is becoming irrational. If I can think I'm a cat, if I can think I'm a woman, if I can make up whatever I want, that's irrational because it falls outside the laws of logic. But now we have to take a step back. Yes, the laws of logic exist, but why? And the atheist will say, well, they just exist. They're just brute facts. We don't know. But an immaterial law of logic needs what to exist? An immaterial, logical mind. A necessary being. Otherwise, it would never exist. See how easy these things are to refute if we're taught how to think? It's really not that hard. But all of this has been shut out of our education system. Any of this isn't being taught anymore. I've been in high school, it's been 25 years since I graduated. You open up a history book, right away there's a skull of a monkey saying we evolved. Right in the front page of the book, of a history book. They're putting philosophical naturalism on every single learning discipline as it's a fact. But what we are doing is being imposed upon by a religious belief. And I took a picture. I want to read this book. I hope I can find it real quick. It just came to my mind. I took a picture the other day. It's right here. Civilization forged in faith. The last 100 years, we have been a civilization that's been forged in faith or not. Meaning, the past 100 years, has our curriculum been a faith-based curriculum or not? No. That's an incorrect answer. It's true, because atheism is a faith. So when I took that, I'm like, I got to take a snapshot of that, because that's good. We have been a civilization forged in faith over the past 100 years, just not the Christian faith. It's been the faith of naturalism, that God does not exist, that there is no necessary being ordaining things and holding things together, that we are a product of a random chance, chaotic universe. These are all faith statements, every single one of them. But because a scientist in a lab coat says they're true, we think that what they say and what their interpretation is and the science are the same. We connect it. We have to separate that. These are two distinct things. There is no line that you can draw between what the scientist says and their interpretation outside of their presuppositions and their beliefs. Nobody can do this. Everybody has beliefs that they rest things upon, even the atheist. What the atheist is really good at doing is making it look like the Christians are biased in their beliefs and the scientists are objective in their facts, when both have belief as their foundation. If we can point that out, now we have driven a wedge in their philosophy, and now you can pour the water through. You can start going down this list. Non-being cannot produce being. How does an explosion create order? How does random chance create purpose and meaning? All of these philosophical questions now that all the philosophers have wrestled with over the years, that the Bible answers adequately. If we understand the question the philosopher is asking, then we can bring in the biblical interpretation of that. And that's our goal in apologetics. So on the bottom of page 2, as J.P. Moreland points out, the scientific method is dependent upon much more than just the laws of science and the laws of logic. Now we have what? Ethical judgments are also a necessary component of science. How so? You ever seen that meme where there is a guy looking through a microscope and there's a wad of cash underneath it? You know what a meme is? I first better start there, right? And he's looking through this microscope, and he's got a wad of cash in his hand. What is that meme trying to say? Yeah, that science is influenced by money. So what you're not really getting is true science. You're getting projection. You're getting where they want it to go. You're getting what they want it to say, regardless of what it says. So can science be biased? In what way? The science itself is not, because what is. The law of identity is true. What is. But the interpretation of what that is can be biased. Why do we automatically assume that all scientists are non-biased? Why do we automatically assume that a scientist looks at something objectively? That they're clear-minded? That they don't have any presuppositions that they're bringing in? Why do we give that? They used to give that to ministers, but ministers don't get that anymore because religion's been tossed out the door. Now the scientist has become the new priest or the new pastor. And when we hear a scientist speak, it's like, oh, okay, there's pure objective fact coming from his mouth. Why do we do that? Why do we give them that much leeway without starting to question their interpretation rather than the evidence that they're looking at through the microscope? There's a difference. So ethical judgments are also a necessary component, as seen with the Nazis in the eugenics movement. You guys familiar with what the eugenics movement is? The eugenics movement is they can make a pure race, a pure ethnicity, by eliminating the inferior ethnicities. So let's sterilize the inferior ones so they can't procreate, and let's keep the superior races breeding. That's the eugenics movement. Scientifically, they were trying to do this. One cannot scientifically approve their attempts to create a superior race by sterilizing the inferior races as being immoral. If you're only using science, and only the hard sciences can bring about truth, there is no way you can say that what the Nazis were doing were wrong. So prove to me in a scientific laboratory that they're wrong. You need other things. Morality is immaterial. Morality can't be seen under a microscope. It can't be tested in a laboratory. So when a scientist is conducting an experiment, he needs moral principles that need to guide that process. Otherwise, you could be all over the map. So do you see how Hume's fork, I don't have it on the board anymore, basic truths and empirical evidence, they're only putting two things on the fork. And science is only one way of attaining knowledge. It's not the only way. But what they do is they cut off all other ways and they make it the only way. And they contradict themselves because they use philosophy and theology as well in their interpretation. Any questions up to this point? Did I? You want me to?
Well, you believe the science.
So, yeah. Well, we won't go down that road, but yes. All right. Okay. I'm going to dodge that bullet. Top of page 3. Moral principles cannot be derived from a test tube or discovered in a laboratory. Morality is immaterial. It needs an immaterial moral source, a necessary being. See, now we're going back to the same thing. This is what we're going to be doing this fall. Taking these apart, looking at them, looking at the nature of them, proving how that can't be by natural means. The impossibility of the contrary means it must be created, so there must be a necessary being. So we're going to be doing this all fall. And hopefully what we can do is create a thinking pattern, a habit in our mind, that when we hear something, we go through this thinking process in order to verify what we're hearing. So the conclusion is this, and this is going to be kind of like the thesis or the basis for the whole fall project. Now, next 2 weeks, I got to remind to tell you, we have missionaries come in the next 2 weeks. So whenever that third week is, we'll be picking up class. But the next 2, we got missionaries. So here's the whole underlying thesis. You have C, B, and A. So if we take C as the experiment, we take B as the interpretation, and we take A as the foundation. So what's been demonstrated is both the Christian and the philosophy of scientism. Notice what I'm going to start calling it now. What it is, a philosophy. Scientism is not scientific. Scientism is a philosophy. Why is scientism not scientific? Can't empirically verify it. It's a belief. So if it's a belief, it's philosophical. So what has demonstrated is both that the Christian and the philosophy of scientism operate on necessary objects of faith, which is we are defining as category A. Science operates on faith. Science operates on faith. We have to start hammering this home into our heads because we have been taught to think that science is purely objective fact. We have to get that out of our heads. The Christian has the infinite, all-knowing mind of Yahweh as their foundation. The atheistic scientist has chaotic, impersonal, random chance for theirs. So if we're going to draw two charts here to illustrate this, the atheist has this over here, and the Christian has the necessary being, and I'm going to abbreviate it, the tetragrammaton, Yahweh. That's who we have. The necessary being. What is a necessary being again? A necessary being is a being that cannot not exist. He must exist. He cannot not exist. He must exist. If he don't exist, nothing exists. So the Christian has this. The atheist has that for A. So in reality, materialists, here's the third bullet point now on page 3 under conclusion. In reality, materialists, so when I use the word materialist, scientism, philosophic naturalism, atheism, that's all the same philosophy. Just got different terms for it. So in reality, materialists cannot account for the existence of logic, mathematics, first principles, uniformity of nature, the mind, or the reliable sensory experience from a naturalistic worldview. And we're going to be taking these apart, each one of these, each week. We're going to be taking a look at logic. We're going to be taking a look at first principles, uniformity of nature, the mind, sensory experience. Once you start to dissect these and you get this mold into your head on how to look at something from the bird's eye view down and compare and contrast both, this is very simple to take apart. So according to the atheist, these things just simply exist. They don't have a foundation for it other than this over here, that it just created itself. Wide open holes to refute this. What they are is they're brute facts, self-existing with no explanation. What we want to do is push it even further than this. Okay, so the laws of logic exist. The atheist will say yes, and you're going to ask them how, and they're going to say that. But what are they? And they're going to say they just exist. I don't know. Where the Christian is going to say they're immaterial and they're rational. So what do you need in order for them to exist? An immaterial, rational mind, you need a necessary being, and that being is Yahweh. There's no way of demonstrating how logic and math came into existence or why they function as they do by naturalistic means. They'll just say they just do. Well, that's nice. But in order to really understand the nature of anything, we got to go beyond this and see how that came into existence to begin with. They don't want to go here so much because this is where the fatal flaw is. Their foundation is severely cracked. All you need to do is just flick it with your finger and it'll crumble. They just exist. We all use them. The naturalist cannot give account for category A. So if you can't give an account for category A, remember, we have a starting point, a method, and a conclusion, right? If you can't give an account for A, then what you're saying about B and C is, why would I trust you there? Your experimentation might be accurate, but how about your interpretation? What if the scientists today were eugenicists and they're trying to engineer stuff to take vitamins out of our food supply? Then they're going to think they're morally right because they're trying to make the inferior race. See how morality and ethics and all of these things can be tied into the interpretation? And let's just think I'm not trying to start conspiracy theories. What I'm trying to say is let's just think they're unethical. But they're thinking they're ethical. by doing these things. So we have a huge, huge problem in interpretation if you don't have the correct foundation. If you're not Christian and you're doing science, that doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be doing immoral science, but you can be, because now you don't have a moral foundation to do it. Now what's your moral foundation? That's how you get Nazi Germany. So you see, when you take God out of the equation, anything is possible from a human standpoint. We can do all sorts of crazy things. So we need to be founded and rooted in Christian principles, even in science. Because if you want to take AI, and if you want to take blood doping, and you want to take transhumanism, and all of these things that are coming up on the horizon now, if you don't have A, where are we going? I don't know. It can get scary if you let your mind go down that path. But then at the end of the day, God's the one who ordains all things. He's sovereign over all things. So we have that to rest on, that God has a plan and a purpose for all of this. But if you don't have A, there is no plan and purpose. Humanity's in charge. They're steering the ship. Where are we going? So these will be the things we're taking a look at. I'm a minute past my time. We'll pray and we're finished. Lord, we thank you for your word and grounding us in reality and grounding us in truth. And we pray that we just let these principles sink deep into our mind to be able to interpret and to discern what we hear in today's culture and to evangelize your truth to anyone we come in contact with. And we ask, Lord, in this your Son's name, amen.